Education is in a bit of a crisis. I actually am thrilled to be back at Syracuse University. I think there's a limit to what the federal government can do, and I don't say that as a kind of a Newt Gingrich, market-driven, given person. I think there's a role for the federal government in creating a system of rights and a system of laws to enforce social policy. The problem with the ADA is that it's a law that is sort of enforced by voluntary sort of lawsuits, as opposed to, the National Guard isn't going to come to integrate schools with people with disabilities. That's just not going to happen. That's not the way it was designed. There's some sort of laissez-faire idea about people with disabilities just sort of assimilating because there's this law. So there's a limit to how much that's going to do. I mean, I think what is much more powerful is a sense that people have that inclusion is the norm. And that comes from living with things like curb cuts, sort of a physically open environment that speaks architecturally of inclusion, and to then go into an environment where doors are narrow, where steps and obstructions are everywhere, and for people who are able-bodied to have the experience, this doesn't feel right to me. And part of the reason it doesn't feel right is because it doesn't feel inclusive. There's a tangible sense of these things. So developing a tangible sense of what inclusion is, a tangible discourse to articulate this covenant that exists, that I truly believe exists, that people with disabilities aren't here to annoy you. We're here on this earth the same reason you are. We're alive. It is an active act for you to ignore my needs. I'm not doing anything aggressive by just showing up, but yet the way communities deal in an intolerant way is to say, oh, wow, we have to drop what we're doing and handle your needs, Mr. Disabled Person. No, that's not how the social covenant works. If there's someone in our community who has this need, that's part of our responsibility. The uneducated don't come to us as an annoyance. Uneducated children don't arrive on our doorstep as a kind of a, stop what you're doing, fun's over, we have to be educated now because we're stupid. No, kids are uneducated. That's their natural state. People with disabilities have certain needs. It's their natural state. That has to happen at a local level. That's not something that really can be articulated at a federal level in a law. And the danger with federal programs is that people tend to respond to them in a very detached way. It's kind of like remote control. Well, that was fixed. I mean, it's like what happened to me outside of a restaurant recently. It had a lot of stairs, and I was asking for some help to get into the restaurant, and somebody says, "Isn't there a law that was supposed to fix this?" So you wanted me to get a lawyer, or are you going to help me up the stairs? I mean, it's just people have an idea that this is fixed because they read a headline. No, it's local acts of tolerance, local acts of inclusion, and a local sort of articulation of the value of inclusion is really going to tell the tale from here on out. What we've seen in market-driven America is a kind of a limit to how much profit can be made simply selling to a normal aggregate. If you get 80%, you can make your money off of them. The 20% that the clothes don't fit for, that the services doesn't work for, forget about them. You're concerned more about the 80%. Government has worked that way. Market-driven capitalism has worked that way. And what we're discovering now with kind of this massive breakdown in the mass audience is that systems that simply deal with the kind of 80% norm are going to constantly be breaking down because you have a 1 in 4 chance or a 1 in 5 chance of somebody coming to the door who doesn't meet your model, who you have to stop everything and deal with. And so systems are beginning to realize that they have to be designed for a certain amount of diversity going in, otherwise the system has to shut down anytime somebody different comes. And that's true, we're talking about linguistic groups, immigrant groups, religious groups, what about the kosher meal? Oh my God, if you have to shut down to produce a kosher meal in an airline, the system doesn't work. So there's an expectation that people are going to be asked about these kinds of things. That, I think, is the dynamic that begins to change things. It's very slow. It's very hard to perceive. It comes with its own incentives, so you can't like create a law that's gonna, you can't create like the anti-stupidity law. Systems that work well will, by their own success, thrive and produce more. It sounds sort of social Darwinian, and I don't believe that simply left to their own devices everything's going to be great. But I do think that the power of local activism and the celebration of local successes is what keeps the engine moving and keep people going, man, doing it this way is so much better than just the angry person at the desk saying, I got nothing for you, and the person going away mad. People just have to realize that that is such a sign of system totally broken that they don't want to do that. I think there'll be an interim period where there's a lot of kind of compensatory, where, oh, we have a place for you. It's called the come over here and we won't take you seriously for the next 10 years kind of department, which makes it look like they're doing something for you, but they're actually not doing something. That's a dangerous situation. In many communities in America, we're there, where they have a department of bullshit department where they just sort of pretend to humor you and don't actually offer you anything and give you a lot of busy work. That's scary. But I think ultimately it's parent advocates, successful outcomes, and finding a way to celebrate them and make sure that people understand that this is a good way of doing things creates the alternative. I've always found it very ironic and funny that public policy makers in education and local education are constantly arguing in the public sector for more parental involvement. And boy, if we've got a community school where the parents are really involved, this is great. Principals are just begging for parental involvement. You go into a special ed environment and they don't want parental involvement. The parents are the cranks. They're the moms or the nutcases that are coming in, and the tendency is within the schools to counsel them, Mrs. Gillespie, you really need to get over this. We'll handle this, okay? Your emotion is not helping the situation. I mean, people with, disabled kids get this all the time. How can it be the case that passionate parental involvement is good in a public school setting and outrageously bad in a special ed setting? Clearly, there's something wrong with the system that this should be the case. There's nothing more valuable than a parent advocate. And if there's a sense of, crank that comes from that parent advocate, it's because they're finding a system that's incomprehensible. It's not the parent's fault that they're mad. The parent didn't come mad. The parent got mad when they realized there's nothing there for them. Hello, my child needs this. No, you need, a psychiatrist. Well, anyone would get mad if they got that message. But policymakers don't see it. They continue to, we really want parental involvement for our public school here, but you parents with special needs kids, please stay home. It's just not going to work. I think that, for the longest time we've been deluded into thinking that disability is some kind of exception to the rule, that it is an anomaly that takes us out of what we would normally be doing. And I don't know where that delusion comes from, quite frankly, because it seems like all around us there's evidence that people respond in different ways. There's an extraordinary diversity to humanity and the biosphere, if you want to get really broad. And certainly the whole strategy for human success on Earth has related to being extremely flexible and being able to do much with little, and to improvise in radically changing circumstances. And certainly people with disabilities have been around forever. And if we talk about the 20th century, with the development of modern medical capabilities, the idea that people are living with disabilities ought to be a badge that we wear with a certain kind of honor. So the idea that there's something special about people with disabilities that comes out of an odd combination of weird circumstances and bad luck is really ridiculous. People with disabilities are a consequence of the success of everything we've been doing as a civilization, keeping people alive, making things work, dealing with radically changing circumstances. Of course, people with disabilities would thrive in a situation like this. So to suddenly say, oh, this need is special, seems to me to be the incongruous moment. Everything we've been doing as a society has had as a consequence that people are surviving longer and living longer and being able to compensate for losses and deficits, physical and mental. To suddenly say, oh, this is special, this is weird, oh, this is too much, is arbitrary and anti-democratic and outrageous in a certain way. Yet, you know, we have this idea that basically all we're really required to do to pass the test of civilization is to take care of the normal people, and that everything else is extra credit. And that's just bizarre. It's just, there are only needs. There are no special needs. The concept doesn't exist. It's estimated that in addition to the 2,500 or so killed in action in Iraq, there are tens of thousands of people with some sort of permanent disability, and probably, you know, a good 5,000 of them with a disability that's easily identifiable, particularly the kinds of injuries that are happening in Iraq, serious burns, what's called polytrauma, where people through blast injuries have a combination of head, limb, and internal injuries, the kinds of injuries that no one's ever survived in war. And, you know, a spinal cord injury was not a survivable injury in World War I, typically. It was rare that happened. But in the Iraq War, you're dealing with people coming home with missing eyes, missing parts of their skull, missing 3 limbs. There are quad amputees, a number of them from the Iraq War. You know, what does this mean? Certainly the Army uses as a badge of honor its medical care, that it can airlift people from an improvised explosive device in Baghdad to Walter Reed Hospital in under 36 hours. You know, that's great, but people are going to be living with these injuries for decades. And, you know, the great irony is, you know, the Afghanistan campaign was called Enduring Freedom. The mission of both Afghanistan and Iraq was to give freedom to the people of those countries. There's now another mission, and it's what kind of freedom are these disabled soldiers going to have in the United States? These are questions that are posed both for the military and for society at large. In a war that is defined by its intransigent and hopelessly bloody aftermath. I mean, toppling Saddam was trivial, tactical matter. Dealing with the aftermath is a big deal. Our soldiers have extraordinary capability. Saving them on the battlefield ultimately is a trivial matter. What their lives are going to be like, that's the hard question. And my great hope is that somehow we see this delusion for what it is, that when we spend lots of money on acute care, that we really are making a promise with people that we have to follow through on rehabilitative and long-term care and make a place for people to survive. There's no point in them surviving if we are going to then shun them and have them, you know, live apart from all of us. Both the Civil War, World War I, World War II, certainly Vietnam, have produced extraordinary social upheavals from the demands of veterans groups. In the case of Civil War, it's pensioners, which transformed our relationship, our military in the United States. In World War I, it was partly pensions. It was the civil unrest that took place after World War I produced the GI Bill after World War II, which transformed American society. The veterans returning from World War II and going to college transformed U.S. society, created a middle class that wasn't there before. Vietnam, the unmet needs after Vietnam produced a sense of hopelessness and real scars in our national psyche. The one thing we can say is there will be some profound social consequence of what's gone on in Iraq. My sense is that it has something to do with disability.